and welcome to this interview for Time of Your Singing at La Monnaie de Munt. I'm here with composer Kris Defoort and Claron McFadden, the soprano, and I'm delighted to welcome both of you here and to spend the next 45 minutes discussing this beautiful new opera. My name is Veronka Köver. I'm editorial coordinator at OperaVision. And I would very briefly like to introduce the two of you because our audience has not yet had the chance to see you on stage. Tomorrow at 7:30 Central European Time. Don't miss out on the stream at 7:30 at OperaVision. I'm repeating myself. So, Kris, you are often introduced as an avant-garde jazz pianist and a composer. And Claron, you are a singer with a dizzying range of spanning centuries and genres from Baroque to contemporary repertoire. And in a sense, that is already an introduction to this opera, The Time of Our Singing, because a lot of those musical influences can be found in the score. Kris, can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration, the origin, your encounter with this piece, which I believe is based on a novel, Richard Powers' novel of the same name. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, it's very simple. When I read the book, I fell in love with it right away. It's like 15 years ago I read it. And I was sure I wanted to make an opera about this one. Especially because he talks about music in this book like very thoroughly and through a mixed family that are all musicians in their soul and also professionally. And at the same time, I fell from the one surprise in the other when I was reading, like he was describing my own musical life, you know. My own musical life has been very eclectic also. And so it was like written on my skin, you know, and that was the main reason why I wanted to do this
I understand.
book. Yeah.
I understand. And did you immediately have Claron in mind for the role of Delia Daley? I know that your musical collaboration harks back over 20 years. Claron, you played the main role in Kris's first opera, The Woman Who Walked Into Doors, based on Roddy Doyle's novel, another novel. I think we will talk about that later as well. Did you already see Claron's face for that role?
But okay, I have to then tell the story very briefly.
Of course,
you know, it's about Afro-American woman. She's like 20, and we are in the year 39, and she wants to become a singer, opera singer, because she had a very good education through her father, who was maybe the first generation, like doctor educated, so she had chances to also study classical music, and that was her dream. And she goes to the concert of Marian Anderson, and she meets this Jewish European man who is a scientist who fled the Nazis, and they fall in love and they make 3 children and who become musicians. And of course it's this whole topic also of Afro-American people and even Métis people in between black and white that want to have a career in this classical opera and classical music world. And because of the history of the segregation, it was not easy at all in the beginning. So it's this whole story of these 3 children and the parents, and at the same time it's talking so much about music and the joy of making music and making bridges in the music, like nobody owns a style of music, you know. And that's a little bit what I do in my life since I'm born, you know. I was raised by a father who was a pianist and a choir conductor, and I would just learn music like this by singing Bach and classical music. And then very fast I was fascinated by jazz, and so later on I was a bar pianist and also a composer in New York. And I came back and I started to write operas. And this book is also through the two sons. One is a really gifted singer and the other one is a pianist. And because of what's happening in their life, he's describing how their musical life is evolving. And actually, my own life was like reflected in that. Because, for example, the singer, because of the difficulties, he lives in the States, he goes to Europe. And he becomes a big star there, and finally he ends up in the Baroque and authentic Renaissance music scene with Philip Herwegen and with Gustav Leonard and with Bruggen and with Keuken. And I'm reading this book and I'm like, it's not possible, you know, because I studied with these people.
Of course.
So, and then your second question, and then I will stop talking.
Famous last words.
So, if you hear about a story, it was an evidence for me that Claron would sing the role of the mother, you know, the singer. I mean, it was so obvious. Plus, I know Claron now since like more than 20 years, because we worked really together for the first time on my first opera, The Woman Who Walked Into Doors, and Claron was the main character. And since then, we did a lot of adventures musically,
Yeah.
like concerts also a lot together. A lot of improvisation also. Music theater.
Was it as obvious for you, Claron, that you would become Delia Daley as it was for Kris?
At the moment he asked me, yes. It's strange because the book was sent to me when it came out by someone, and I didn't know whom. So it just showed up at my door, and I thought, oh, what an interesting book. And it took me some years before I found out who had given me that book, and why she thought it was. She's a writer herself, famous writer. And it was interesting that she thought it was very important for me to have this book. And so I was indeed very intrigued. And when he said, oh, I would like you to be Delia, I thought, oh, great, yes.
And obviously, we are in the midst of a world premiere here. So you are the very first Delia Daley that exists. And can you tell us a little bit about that experience of being the first person to create and to inhabit a role? So any other singer who's going to perform and sing the role of Delia Daley will be, in a sense, compared and measured to.
It's like all
to your incarnation.
Sorry, like all repertoire that has been written, opera roles have been written for a specific person. Handel wrote roles for people, Puccini, Wagner, and everything after that, everyone's always been following in the footsteps of that person, adding their own interpretation to it. And I use this sort of analogy of if Sophia Loren and she goes to, I don't know, a famous composer, clothing designer. What's the most famous one? She always works with this person, his name is gone. And they say, okay, I'm going to make this costume for you, or this dress, or this thing. How would you like it? Then you start this dialogue. Well, I like this and like that. And it's made. And then she puts it on and says, actually, it could be a bit more this, a bit more that. And they make it together. So there's like a structure. Kris has an idea in his head, a certain logic in his head. I put on, as it were, the score, and then go, oh, maybe it could be a bit more this, or a bit more that, or a bit less this, and he hears it himself. So you're actually co-creating at the same time, which is very different than you're actually putting on a coat that somebody was made for somebody else. Also possible.
So one very important thing is also why I chose Claron, is because I knew at one point I could also ask, okay, here, Claron, you have an example, but if you really feel like improvising around or you invent something else, go ahead, you know, because I know Claron is capable of doing that. And so now what is interesting is that she does it so beautifully, but maybe it will become a standard that other people will just copy it.
Well, that would be cool, right? Yeah, exactly.
I understand. So it's very liberating. And do you think that your experience as a jazz musician and the freedom that comes with that sort of co-creation and improvisation is something that translates well into the opera setting with the singers that are more classically trained? Do you have that same sort of energy when rehearsing the time of our singing?
Okay, one important thing, and that's a little bit my specialty, is that I mix these two worlds, you know, in the orchestra. There's a jazz quartet and there's the classical chamber orchestra.
Yes.
The musicians are mostly classical. Claron is basically classical, but I know her background of gospel and blues. She's not scared to improvise, so she's an exception too. And then we have one more singer who really comes out of more musical, like rock, pop voice with a microphone like this.
Abigail Abraham.
Abigail Abraham. To your question, if it's like very natural, now the result is very natural to me, even with the other singers. There is even a scene where the family like improvises around the piano and everything is written down, but you feel that even the other singers start to take more and more liberties. And that's really nice to see. So, but it asked on this little 2 months of work, progress. I mean, it was really every time, but I know it's every time this encounter and clash between these two worlds, and little by little, they start to understand and have a drink together afterwards. And
yeah, it's even this idea of, maybe it's too pedantic, but where the one is. If jazz musicians who are not necessarily used to having a conductor, they keep a certain kind of groove, and once the groove is there, that's it. And with classical musicians with a conductor, they're more flexible. They follow the conductor, and the beat is up here somewhere. So that's one. Whereas with the drummer, he was saying, that's one. So you have like gadung, 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 and which is to kind of witness that, kind of going, okay, I have to anticipate, I have to delay. So seeing that process was really cool, actually, to see how they are dealing or were dealing with it, and the frustrations, and that you feel, now maybe it was just saying it out, you know, was enough to kind of go, okay, we get it now. It's okay. Now I'm going to go one. So it's been interesting. It's actually interesting to see how these two worlds come together.
That sounds fascinating. So it's also creating a bridge between the musical worlds of the musicians and performers on stage. So,
sorry, Giorgio Armani was the man I was looking for.
Oh, Armani!
Everybody's coming, you know.
I kept my mouth shut before saying something stupid.
But I thought, who is it? Giorgio Armani.
I wanted to say.
No,
you knew.
No,
in hindsight, everyone knows.
Yeah, everybody knows.
So obviously, also in Richard Powers' novel, music plays a very important role, and a lot of musical pieces are actually analyzed in depth. What I find very intriguing and fascinating is that all of these influences and all of this atmosphere seeps into your opera, but without it becoming a pastiche. You're not making it into pure citations. How did you go about that? Can you tell us, for us lay people, without getting too technical, about the compositional process? How did you find the right mixture between these different genres, or do you not even think in genre at all?
I don't really think in genre, no. It's more that I use my experience now, let's say it's 40 years of musical experience. That's somewhere in the back of my mind, you know, playing-wise. It's often just by playing, also by looking at scores, and especially by hearing and feeling. And I have no complex to let everything sip in. If I feel it's right, then I just use a certain influence from a certain style. And another thing is that for me the most difficult thing when I write an opera, and that takes most of the time in the beginning, is I have to find the right sound. Not only the language of the melody or the harmony, but also the colors. And so I take a lot of time, and when I start to find that, then I'm on my track, and then I let everything come like if I turn, every note I write, I turn it around like 20 times. I have to really, before I put it on the paper, and then once it's on there, and I feel it's right, then I just continue. And I work like this for 4.5 years on this opera. And the second thing is that in the book, you have all these music quotations and analysis and everything. I almost used nothing from the book. I didn't want to do that, but I used other things. That a lot of Bach, there's a lot of Bach mentioning Dowland, Puccini at one point. But how I go about it, because it was about music, I didn't want to fall into the trap of like to pastiche, like you said. I think my specialty is a little bit to use all kind of influences, and I just improvise with it, and I make like my own language with it. But for example, what I did a lot in this opera is that I knew that, for example, I can cite especially passages with Delia Daley, with Claron singing. I know I will go into the Bach already 5 minutes before, so everything I write is based on that, but nobody can know, only me, you know. But for me, it's like it's there. And maybe for some people, or for people, they feel something, but you cannot say it's Bach at all. And then suddenly it comes out, and it goes away again, like it's
fleeting.
Yeah. So let's say that there's a lot of things happening simultaneously. You know, there's contemporary music at the same time. The harmony of Bach is there somewhere, some passages, and then sometimes there is even jazz at the same time. There's a lot of layers, because what I love is that, for example, Delia Daley sings something, and I like to translate maybe mixed feelings underneath with some other world happening. And so we have this in this opera that, you know, we have these really lyrical passages, and underneath it's like something really hectic happening.
Unnerving, yes.
Like because you feel, okay, something is not right around them in the society, for example.
Of course. Of course. And once again, the novel combines both history with a capital H and personal stories, personal histories, in a very interesting non-chronological way. There's a polyphony of voices, which obviously in opera you translate differently because it is obviously a temporal medium. I am curious as to how these ideas of jumps in time, which you have taken out for clarity's sake from the libretto, how you maintain them in the music. Is there something of that theme of that is obviously in a sense symbolized by the character of David Strom, your husband in the opera, who's a physicist who works on general theory of relativity. Is there something that influenced your music at all, or not?
I think unconsciously yes, and intuitively yes. But it's true that in the text of the libretto, your husband, so David Strom in the opera, he's a scientist studying time, and he talks a lot about time, and in the book it's a lot about time, the notion time. I have to admit that when I think the libretto is fabulous. You know, Peter van Kraai made a great libretto together with me, but it's especially him. But still I sensed, and him too, there's almost nothing about the notion time in the text. So I was thinking, ooh la la, maybe that's a little bit, he will not come out really as a scientist studying time. Peter didn't say so much about that, and I think intellectually he understood already it will be in the music. Me, I just start composing, and it's more afterwards that I realized, wow, it's treating time a lot, but it's just not verbalized. But for example, the fact that we put everybody on stage all the time, and that everybody tells the story, and that the children tell the story about how their parents meet in the beginning of the opera. They are not even born. Huh? And they are there as adults, and they will. So we play with time all the time from the beginning. You know, it's like what he says in the book, past, future. There's a point somewhere that it all happens all the time at the same time. And that's what in this opera is very often the case. And then the other thing is that there's a lot of musical things simultaneously. You're in contemporary music or in like beat, jazz, time, and then there's like some Doland on top. So you have also these different times musically together. I didn't do this consciously. I'm a composer who does a lot by feeling. Eh? I'm very precise. I take a lot of time, but it's not like I will now do something complex with time.
It's not deliberate.
No, yes. It's more like I just do it the way I feel. And I have to admit, I'm very happy also about how the time floats in between the scenes, going from one scene to another, because the opera is from 39 to 92 in 2 hours and a half. You know, you have like 50 years of history.
Quite a sweep.
And as a joke, when we started rehearsing, I said, "Oh, you get 2 sons in 1 minute in the opera." But that's the magic of opera, that you, with all these different disciplines, you can play with time a lot.
I'd like to add one thing from a theatrical point of view, or dramaturgically, that there was always this question of who are we in this play? Because when you start looking at it in a very technical way, indeed, we all come on stage. Some people are going to be born 60 years later. Some people were. How does that work? And this idea that we are ourselves, but we are inhabiting, we're telling the story of these people, makes us all timeless in a way. So we play also with this thing as if we're here to share this moment in time as ourselves, but still crawling into the skin of people from before, going through their lives, how they interact with each other. And so it's like you have shadows, which is also kind of funny, sometimes a way of denoting time in terms of something that is there but is not there. So we're playing a lot with this kind of thing. What is there? What is being told? Who is telling it? How do you react to it? So that's the kind of interesting thing.
Absolutely, it adds a fascinating layer. I was wondering how to approach that question because...
Oh, no, I just ruined it for you.
No. On the contrary, you gave me the perfect cue. The idea of being on stage while your character is not yet born or has already passed away, and yet you're fully present. Who would you say you are on the stage when Delia is no longer?
Interesting. I mean, I think Delia is the same person she was when she walks on in the beginning. She's somebody who, I don't say I am Delia Daley and I walk on and once I'm dead, I'm no longer Delia Daley, but I'm a ghost observing. It's like the spirit of this person is always there, and she's observing and she's witnessing what's happening with her children. She's commenting on it in a way that we imagine when we do something and somebody who's passed going, oh, I wonder what, mom would say about that, or what would my grandmother say about that. So and then I'm kind of giving a kind of visual voice to that which is going on in
you indeed are.
Yeah, well, I hope.
I can confirm.
That's a choice that I made to interpret her, which makes her more active. I mean, originally I would be already in the bar after the first act.
Yeah. And because Delia dies after the first act.
Sorry, we're killing.
I did not want to give it away, but you were entitled to.
No, he did.
Yes.
Anyway, and then I helped. But the idea that it's not so academic. We are these characters. We play this. You're gone. Because it opens a whole Pandora's box of who we are, and it's solved by each one feels in a different way about it. So, but this idea that I evolved into this presence that's always there. So I'm there throughout the whole opera, which has been really interesting for me. That I actually, the role became even more present than it would have been. It would have been part of history and gone. We would have moved on. But now it is this kind of thing that's always there, and that's quite powerful.
I agree, yes. And I do think that all of these questions, in a sense, converge to ask a question that has been brought up in many ways, who this Daley family is, or the Strom family, I should say. Perhaps I'm too matrilinear here. Who the Strom family is from an identity perspective. They are obviously mixed race. The father's white, the mother's black. But above and beyond the question of identity and belonging in a racial sense, they do ask themselves this question culturally. Do they belong in the musical traditions that they're interested in? Did you have to ask yourself these questions yourselves as performers and artists when approaching this material?
Okay, yeah. Well, I approached it actually first and foremostly as somebody who grew up in that environment. I'm American, black, growing up in the North, experiencing how that country deals with its history or doesn't deal with it, making a decision to move to another environment, like Jonah did, the eldest son. And so this whole idea of identity, certainly if you're talking about post-Reconstruction era, so like the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century in America, which is when this sort of starts to take place, there's a huge identity crisis with people of color, because they were afforded many things, like Kris said, that her father was a doctor. He was born in the late 19th century, living in Philadelphia, which I think is ironically the city of brotherly love. So I think Richard Powers, he was very clever in his choice, that it's this kind of irony that it's still a lot of things happening there. So I know from my own past what it's like, this question of you grow up in a certain environment, you make certain choices, you have, in a way, two identities, like this family. They have three identities, or four even. They have a black identity, they have a musical identity, which is European-based, there's a European coming, there's a Jewish element in it, so it's all this thing, plus you have these children who are mixed. And at that time, there was always this question of what is the identity of children of mixed race? They always get pushed in one race. And I'm one of the first person when they say that Barack Obama was the first black president. I said, well, actually, he was mixed. So we choose what we want to say now, but at that time, there was no choice. And so that's a very, very important aspect of this opera and the storylines dealing with being pushed into a certain environment, and the only haven they have is at home. When they're at home, they're in this kind of, it's almost a make-believe illusion kind of world where there's music, it's very beautiful and it's wonderful, and they can laugh, and as soon as they step outside, they're confronted with the harsh reality of living in a society in which they are not allowed to exist, and ultimately, it has really tragic consequences. So that was the first and foremost on my mind, and secondly, how to give that voice through the notes that and the logic in the composer's mind, how to take that logic and make it my own, so that I understand and can give this woman and in relation to everybody and the characters kind of life that's real. If that makes any sense.
It does. It does. Kris?
Yeah, when I composed the opera and I read the book, as I said, it was flabbergasting for me like the story of these people, but also especially the music that was so strong, the language of the musical language of the writing also. And I'm a little bit like the parents actually, kind of naive and idealistic and hopeful, you know, like I saw like there are a lot of quotes in the opera and the book. I didn't even think about color actually when I read the book, you know. I saw these real people, and I you know, I fall in love with these people. It's every time like this, you know, with my other operas too. I always fall in love with my characters, and I live with them for like 4 years, and I translate them into music with text. I make them alive. How I feel it's right, but that's my interpretation. Eh? It's always only afterwards or near the end, because of the comments of other people, that I started to say, Ola, it's true that actually there are topics about the racism and black and white, and but the book and the opera and the music goes beyond that. It's more like you say, it's especially like why we should categorize that this belongs to this people, this country, this music belongs to that people or that people. And so it's for me, it stays optimistically a statement that we should be curious for the other culture and be open and vive la mixité.
Vive la mixité. In any case, I believe that there's an argument to be made for the fact that the novel and the opera deal in great depth with the question of who does this music belong to, and in the same sense, you could say, would it only be an African American composer who's entitled to put this novel to music, or is it open to anyone who feels called to it? Are you at all? I mean, both the public reaction and the critics have been blown away by the last performances. Are there any reactions that you were surprised to hear? Obviously not the applause and the optimism, but the way that the people have reacted, and obviously there's a very topical parallel to be made with the Black Lives Matter movement, etc. But do you feel that it's also in some ways reducing to always bring it in parallel with that, or can you leave it at that? Do you think that that's...
I'm going to jump in. I mean, there are like 3 loaded questions there that each could take an hour. The first thing I want to say is that the idea of Kris to do this opera, to give life to this book, happened long before Black Lives Matter happened. And it's very important that it comes from not an opportunism,
Of course.
but my worst fear is that it will become the victim of the opportunistic fear that's happening now, where people are saying we have to walk such a straight line, and it becomes very dogmatic, who owns what. And Delia, she says, I mean, nobody owns music, and it should be like that. But at the moment, in the time in which we are living, it's very, very difficult. So I want to say for the record that it's not an opportunistic piece. It's just because of COVID and everything, it's coming out now. But that makes me have even more respect for it. That's one thing. The other thing I mentioned even before is this idea of, or you were saying, would it be better if it had been written by a black person or a white person or this, or I don't know, that what, and the first thing that comes to mind is Porgy and Bess. I mean, every time I sing Summertime, I say, thank you so much, George Gershwin, white descendant of Russian Jewish guy from New York who wrote the most sublime thing I've ever sung in my life, besides, you know. Otherwise I don't get my glass of wine. So it's this idea of, I talk about bridges for me, and I think what is important, and it's something that the cast, we have all these discussions in the dressing rooms, outside on the street, is that we talk about building bridges, if you want to build a bridge, and music culture, but music is the biggest bridge because it's universal. You touch people, and people come out of this opera and they have tears in their eyes, they're inspired, they're touched in a way that goes beyond this dogmatic or dogma, whatever it's called. And that's what I'm hoping, and that's my fervent wish, is that in the midst of all this fear that people have and this opportunism, that there still will be a way, in that sense, that's my optimism and naivete or whatever, that there's a way of building a bridge that we can start communicating, we can start acknowledging, we can start having a dialogue, because you cannot avoid the race issue. This book is as much about that. I mean, we can argue if it's more or not, but because of the zeitgeist, it is about that. Music has always been, but now we're in another way where you have different generations in this production, and how we deal with it, how we discuss it and talk with it, we're definitely ready to build the bridge to having a different dialogue, a more constructive dialogue than saying, oh, we're afraid we're not going to touch it because we might be sending the wrong message, or we might be doing that, and I think that's really a shame. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you for that. The times are ready, you have at one side you have people who say, okay, it's enough, you know, the Me Too also, you know, how women were treated, also the Black Lives Matter, and also ecological. You have this young generation starting to say, it's enough. Okay, I just hope it's through communication now that we can find, like Clarence says, and through building, that we find a solution, and we don't do a new thing of you're with us or you're not with us. I mean, and a second thing for me, very important, is that this opera is much more than just Black Lives Matter. It's much more subtle, it's much more layered. I mean, it depends where you come from socially, culturally. There are so many facets, psychologically. And that's another thing that I would like to see, that's why when people really live it, they are a little bit changed, I think. You know, they start to think about topics differently, because it's just talking about the love of the family with all these issues. And now I'm starting to forget what I wanted to say. Because it's
you were saying young people, I mean, people of this generation, they're ready to have a different,
but now with the social media and everything, it's very positive, because now we can really worldwide take actions, and these young people do it. The other side is that often now we have opinions like, you know, black, white, like without even, you know, profoundly know the topic or the subject or living it. And that's what I want to say. This opera is more about all the colors between black and white, and the grays, and also all the colors. And,
so you would say that the outcome, the desired outcome that you would hope for this is for the opera, for the piece, to build a bridge towards more dialogue and communication. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, yeah.
That sounds like...
For me too. And be open to the other. L'altérité.
Yes.
That sounds like wonderful closing words. Is there something else that you would like to touch upon, or?
No, I think pretty much for this particular subject, it's like this. I think it's important just to reiterate that when people see something musically, they experience something and it touches them. and they are not the same way, whatever it is. Oh, there's somebody there. And we, oh, I've lost it. I just hear Frankenstein in the house. Anyway, I think that we're done now.
The grand foyer
The footsteps have sort
of
of
the
killed
mood.
it.
Well, then let me just reiterate the importance that the public should be there tomorrow at 7:30 for the live stream of the Time of Our Singing from La Monnaie de Munt here in Brussels. You will probably be quite as flabbergasted as we were. Thank you. Thank you, Claron. Thank you, Kris.
Ciao. Thank you.